Okay, I do see the live streaming now, so we are live. Okay, very good. Good evening and welcome to the February 18th, 2021 meeting of the ERCA Board of Directors. I will call the meeting to order and we will start by taking a roll call of all board members to confirm attendance. And we actually don't have any regrets this evening. Very good. I'll be going in alphabetical order of municipality. We've found that muting your line when you're not speaking helps, so please prepare to unmute your microphone when your name is called and then return to mute after you've responded. Councillor Peter Courtney.
Present.
Thank you. Marilyn Morrison.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Morley Bowman.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Vanderdolen.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Laura Lucier.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Larry Patterson.
Present.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Tracy Bailey.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Len Janice.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Carrick.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Sue Desjardins.
Oops, present.
Thank you. Councillor Trevor Jones.
Present.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Larry Verbeek.
Present.
Very good. Councillor Dame Malak.
Present.
Hello. Deputy Mayor Joe Bacchetti.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Jewin Gill.
Present.
Very good. Vice Chair Kieran McKenzie.
Present.
Good evening. Councillor James Morrison.
Present.
Hello. And Councillor Ed Sleeman.
Present.
Very good. Thank you. Now I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this land is in the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe and the Ottawa and the Potawatomi peoples. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and of all the original peoples of Turtle Island, North America, who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. Please raise your hand to indicate if there are any members who need to declare a conflict of interest. Okay, seeing none, we can now proceed with this evening's agenda. So I'm looking for a mover that the agenda for today's meeting, Thursday, February the 18th, 2021, meeting of the Board of Directors be approved. Moved by Councillor Verbeek, seconded by Ed Sleeman. We do not have any, does anyone oppose that? Very good. No hearings this evening. We do have an adoption of minutes. ERCA Board of Directors, the minutes for the January 21st, 2021 meeting of the Board of Directors and the recommendations therein be approved as distributed. Moved by Laura Lucier and Jewin Gill. ERCA Finance and Audit Advisory Board, that the minutes of the January 29th meeting of the Finance and Advisory Board and the recommendations therein be approved as distributed. Moved by Morley Bowman and Marilyn Morrison. That the minutes of December 14th, 2020 Conservation Ontario Council Annual General Meeting be received, and that was distributed via email report BD 37.09. I need a mover there. Larry Patterson and Peter Courtney. Any opposing? Very good. Business arising from previous minutes, there are none. We do have some announcements. So first of all, good evening, and I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly thank Tim Burney for accepting the permanent role of CAO Secretary Treasurer. Your leadership is greatly appreciated and the board looks forward to continuing to work with you in this capacity.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
On behalf of the board, I'd also like to welcome James Bryant. James is still video off. As the Permanent Director of Watershed Management Services, James has been serving as the interim capacity for the past 6 months, and we are thankful for his leadership and continued service. Welcome, James. Congratulations.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Due to ice formation, the Peche Island construction project has been paused and will continue in July in accordance with DFO and MNRF restrictions. Invasive species removal at the Spring Garden Natural Area is ongoing to maintain the ecological integrity of this important natural area. Restoration programs are on track to exceed 125 acres this spring, which is the largest number of spring planting projects planned since 2014. We are also excited that community members have nominated several conservation areas as the best of Windsor Essex in a number of categories, including Hillman Marsh as best birding hotspot, Holiday Beach in the categories of best outdoor attraction and best birding hotspot, and the John R. Park Homestead as both best museum and best historical attraction. Voting takes place on the Tourism Windsor Essex Peely Island website until March the 5th. And we are so pleased that the community so highly values and appreciates these conservation areas. Staff continue to address the high volume of applications, which is currently on par with the last 2 years of record-setting numbers. At the same time, lake levels in the region are lower by roughly 30 centimeters or 1 foot compared to this time a year ago. However, levels are still roughly 60 centimeters to 2 feet higher than the long-term average for this time of year. As a result, staff continue to address the demands from both the development pressures and high lake levels. We do not have any delegations this evening, nor presentations. We do have reports for approval, though. Any questions or comments at this time? Seeing none, okay. Reports for approval, BD 0121, the Turkey Creek Hydrologic and Hydraulic Modeling Professional Services Agreement. And we do have James Bryant available to answer any questions. Does anybody have anything for James at this time?
Madam Chair,
Yes, certainly.
Mark,
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, no, just real fast, I think the cooperation and something very important for us to follow through, and hopefully the grant money comes through and everything is good, and I will move the recommendation.
Okay, fantastic. Moved by Councillor Carrick. Do we have a supporter or seconder? Vice Chair McKenzie, or do you have a comment? Vice Chair McKenzie supports. Anyone opposed? Okay, fantastic. ERCA committee appointments. As there have been several changes in board memberships, the report before you outlines the proposed updates to ERCA's committee composition. That in keeping with the position of chair, I, Tanya Jobin, be appointed to the executive committee, the finance and advisory board, ex officio member of the Essex Region Conservation Foundation, and as the alternate voting member to Conservation Ontario Council, and further that in keeping with his position, Vice Chair Kieran McKenzie be appointed to the Executive Committee, the Finance and Audit Advisory Board, and as the second alternate voting member to Conservation Ontario Council, and further that Councillor Jiwang Gill be appointed to the Conservation Services Advisory Board, and further that CAO Secretary Treasurer Tim Burney be the voting member to Conservation Ontario Council.
Move it.
Larry Verbeek and Len Janice. Anyone opposed? Any questions or comments? Okay, very good. Alrighty, we have the 2021 draft budget options and levy request. Tim Burney and Shelley McMullen will provide the board with an overview of the proposed budget changes and answer any questions regarding this report.
thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll very quickly, I just got a couple of words and I'll hand it off to Shelley. We worked hard at the budget this year, pulling apart various historic programs, historic undertakings of the authority. Responsibly, we have to address the direction of Toronto with respect to Bill 229. And in a transitional process, even though we're still waiting on regulations to be formalized by the province, but responding to the direction of the project or the province with respect to our objects, what is identified as mandatory, what is identified as non-mandatory, parse those out and have those properly articulated in a budget format that hopefully is easily digestible by all. And credit goes to Shelley and to Aaron and Danielle and Nicole, helping us all understand some of the movement that had to take place and some of the things that we've done. So without further ado, the budget report is there, and Shelley will continue.
Thank you, Tim, and through you, Madam Chair. It is my privilege to provide the introduction to this openly transparent budget report. And I wish to highlight that this budget is built on a significant assumption that is essentially a construct or model that attempts to assign, as Tim mentioned, the authority's programs and services to one of two categories, mandatory and non-mandatory services, as identified in the Conservation Authorities Act. As noted in the report, mandatory services include programs that address four categories, essentially: risks of natural hazards, conservation of lands, drinking water source protection, and other services or programs that relate to legislative functions. So administration has taken a very judicious approach. We've attempted to respond to the underlying intention of the Act, and that we haven't assumed that all programs are mandatory, despite our personal perspectives, beliefs, and opinions that each are valuable and address a need in the region. However, non-mandatory does not equate to not necessary or not important, but that the intent of the province through the Act is to give our municipal funders a mechanism to decide on the suite of services to be delivered and also to have a greater say in the use of municipal funds. So ultimately, this hybrid budget incorporates and presents considerable analysis that is really essential to understanding the programs that the authority has historically delivered and intends to deliver in 2021 and how they are funded. And for interested readers, I think page 66 is the most important schedule in the entire report. It details how every major program unit is funded, with the mandatory services appearing in bold. So that schedule is really the very high level overview. So as the report goes on to note, administration met with your Finance and Audit Advisory Board on the 29th, and after discussion and careful evaluation of the options, the committee did endorse a 2% levy increase. I would also like to note that as part of those discussions, the committee recommended a transfer of $118,000 to the Revenue Stabilization Reserve Fund, which represents the accumulated and audited surplus at the end of 2019. And that recommendation is also included in this report. I don't have anything further to note, as the report and accompanying budget companion are very comprehensive. They include new schedules and analysis, and that was really done in preparation for further work related to the transition plan that's really prepares us for this new funding model effective in 2022. So on that note, Tim, myself, and our colleagues can likely answer questions regarding program specifics.
Okay, thank you, Shelley. And do we have any questions? Councillor McKenzie?
Thank you, Chair. And Tim and Shelley, thank you very much for what I think is an enormous amount of work that you put into drafting this budget and drafting it in a new format, given the direction that's come from the province through Bill 229. We had a really good discussion on a lot of these things at the Finance Committee meeting, and I hope folks really took a look at those minutes, because I think we unpacked a lot. But just to touch on something that you that Shelley, you were talking about just a moment ago, maybe I'll ask, to what extent is there specific direction, or do we expect that to come in the regulatory framework that the province comes up with after they go through this the process that they've engaged to really clearly define mandatory versus non-mandatory services? And to what extent, in the absence of that clear definition, was there some interpretation that we undertook to make some of those, I don't know, calls into whether or not a certain service fell within the mandatory versus non-mandatory?
If I may, Madam Chair, as it stands right now, with a literal interpretation of what's been put forward, historic activities that this organization has succeeded in, such as tree planting. Tree planting on private lands is non-mandatory. Tree planting on Conservation Authority held lands is mandatory as part of the land management suite of approvals from the province. Operating the JR Park Homestead as a museum is non-mandatory. But the JR Park property and land management of that property is mandatory because it is a property that actually was transferred to the Conservation Authority and is a conservation area. We still have some unpacking to do and are requiring in the regulation a refinement of some of those things. Some of the other things that we aren't aware of now, we've been very successful in the past of applying for grant. And we would like to, with this board's permission, to continue with those activities to undertake such things as tree planting, to undertake such things as some of our education programming, to undertake some of those other things that currently have still not been refined about just how we proceed. If it is not something attached to levy, we apply for a grant. We have to understand from the province, does this board have the capability to pass a resolution allowing for that to undertake and not require if the undertaking is within Kingsville or within Windsor, do we still need to have an agreement with the specific municipality for something where levy's not attached to it and it's pure grant? How we do that, if this board is the vehicle that allows us that permission. So we have to have clarification of many of those things, and many of those things are activities that this board has directed staff to proceed with. But the province now is instructing us where those activities have to be further refined. And if they're non-mandatory and defined as non-mandatory, the mechanism wherein we are permitted to proceed and who pays and who authorized that payment. So there's still a lot of question marks out there. We wanted to come to this board with it being clear, no hocus pocus, no anything other than we're going to try and cut these things out and identify these things. Notwithstanding, we historically had been very successful in getting grants to supplement activities in land management. And then land management was left light in the levy. Structure now is going to require, and as Shelley has put forward with our assistance on this report, actions and activities at Maidstone Conservation Area, at Cedar Creek Conservation Area, have to be identified through the levy. And that support has to be identified first and foremost by levy. So that requires staff dedicated to those purposes. And so what used to be able to happen was kind of the shell game of being able to get money from an outside source to undertake certain works and whatever else. And it may have not been perfectly clear to this board. And this is what the province is saying, not being transparent or not being fully, how is that work being undertaken? Well, historically, we were able to source grant money and use that to undertake some of those things, and it freed up levy to use levy to leverage other grant money for other things. And maybe it was a bit of a shell game. So those roles, we're attempting to clarify it just as it sits now. And we think the work that we've done right now, we've been conservative in that undertaking.
Okay, so more work to come, but you've done your best with what you know and what you know for sure. And next year's budget may look a little bit different, but this is a very solid foundation, I think, for a first time around under the new regime. maybe, because I think that this is going to be an important question that every partner municipality is going to be asking now when they look at the budget and present it in this way. What goes, and this is a big high level questions, and I recognize that we're in a full board meeting here, but maybe you could unpack just a little bit what goes into those decisions with respect to determining that a non-mandatory service is something that we want to continue to deliver to the region. What's the value proposition there?
If I may, through you, Madam Chair, again, this organization historically has always been engaged in resource management activities. And this organization does not undertake things outside of that realm. The old objects, the existing objects of the authority were very, very broad. We could undertake a program to deal with resource management for anything other than oil, minerals, coals, and gas. That's very, very broad. And in my 35 years being here, I've heard it time and time again, you're exceeding your mandate. You're not doing this. Well, if the mandate actually was written as I described, it's very, very broad. So if this board instructs us to continue to be involved in pursuing trails and trails outside of heavily developed settlement areas as linkages for natural corridors or linkages for floodplain connection or drainage connection, along with recreational activities, well then subject to appropriate agreements that we have to pursue with the affected municipalities, we're in a position to, as I understand it right now, to proceed. It's just that mechanism of what agreements we need to have in place with what municipalities, and or could it be this board and a resolution of this board, we have to receive further instruction on that. But all our other actions and activities, the education activities at the JR Park Homestead on that provincially transferred property to us, if the board is instructing us to continue to offer those, they have to be offered on a fee-for-service basis. And if there is operational costs associated with that, those operational costs have to be outside of the levy. And we have to go to council representation on the various municipalities and secure permission to do so. It gets to be very challenging, cumbersome, and it's not a good business model because you're now negotiating for a service to all the member municipalities. Would you like to, you can opt out, you can do this. Well, you can't plan for this type of business in that type of a realm. But if that's how we have to offer, and if this board says we're still going to be doing those things, then we have to get creative with how we strike those agreements and how we finance some of those activities. Our foundation, our Essex Region Foundation, may assist us with some of those things if, again, private development, private companies, general public see fit to make donations and want to make donations towards certain activities to continue through the foundation. There may be an opportunity, for that to occur. And again, we have to be careful that we're in full compliance with the approved bylaws of the Essex Region Foundation, the approved bylaws of this board, the administrative function of this board, and provincial direction.
Okay, very good. Do you have anything further?
One last question, Chair, if you don't mind, and just a comment there. And again, thank you, Tim, for walking us through all of that. I think actually even some of the comments of the chair earlier talking about how the conservation authorities are valued through this survey shows that some of those non-mandatory services are really valued across the community. But what I did want to ask was about and maybe Shelley could unpack this one for us. What we did, the choice that the finance committee made with respect to recommending that the reserve or the surplus be put into the reserve account, and just sort of explaining why we made that decision at the committee level. I think that was something there was consensus between administration and committee members that that was the appropriate way to proceed, as I recall.
Yes, Councillor McKenzie, through you, Madam Chair. Really, the committee landed on that as a resolution, primarily because that revenue stabilization reserve had been depleted as a result of the social engineering fraud. And basically, we thought going forward with all of the changes, you know, with the act, and that potentially, obviously, there's 900,000 at risk in terms of revenues that the authority currently has. It may not have going forward. But the prudent decision to make really was to transfer basically an unrestricted amount of 118,000 that had accumulated over the past couple of years. Through cost savings and better than expected revenues. And all of that is detailed in past reports, that should be transferred back to the Revenue Stabilization Fund to provide that buffer that had been there, and because the fund had been depleted. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it certainly does. But you did touch on the on the one aspect of the funds being unrestricted had they not been put into the reserve account. And I think that was also part of what factored into the committee's decision, that if there's anything that if there's anything that'll be deemed inappropriate utilization of those funds, it would have to come through by putting into that reserve account. It's going to have to come through the board for approval to be dispersed on whatever might be coming forward. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for that, Shelley. Thank you, Tim. Great job on the budget. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Patterson, and then Janice.
Yes, to you, Madam Chair, maybe to Shelley or to Tim. Shelley, you had mentioned page 66, how the importance to that page was. Yes, it's very important, and I do fully understand it. I will have more people ask me regarding page 89, our breakdown.
Let me just get to 89 here. Oops.
Where does your levy go?
Oh, yes. Okay.
I like that. I've liked that the last couple of years we put that forward. I really believe that we should use this to the best of our ability. Let's get this out here. Let's get people looking at to it for $10.75 per person. What a deal.
Mm-hmm.
What a fantastic report. What everything we get out of it. The only question I would have, and Councillor Mackenzie, sorry about that, was a transfer to reserves. And yes, I do understand what you have said. Now, that will probably be the only question that I might need some, not backing up onto it, but if I may call upon you to get that final answer out to it. Other than that page 89 does speak a lot, and it shows the sincerity of ERCA and what you are doing with our what funds.
Madam Chair, if I can just add a point of clarity to Councillor
Certainly.
Patterson's
For sure.
concern. Councillor Patterson, the transfer to reserves on that graphic is not the 118,000. That transfer, where does your levy go, is the 364,000. So 300 to the infrastructure reserve, and then 64,000 to the human resources admin reserve.
Thank you. I'm marking this in my booklet, and that should help me explain. That'd probably be the only question I have, because I just really appreciate the this posting. And Madam Chair, if we could use that, any press release we can, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Janice.
Thank you, Chair. Based on the audit, the budget committee, great job. I mean, it's obviously, I guess this is more to Tim. You expressed a couple areas that you're not sure. We're not sure. You're not sure. The whole committee's not sure yet on how the government sees some of these items that we're dealing with from in the past and where it's going to head in the future. So do you expect, like, if you reached out, are there answers to come on some of this stuff? Like you mentioned, John Park Homestead. like, okay, it's our property, but if they say, no, you shouldn't be running that house, or you shouldn't be doing this or that, when will those answers come?
Through you, Madam Chair. The province is not saying you shouldn't be doing it. The province is saying you cannot levy for it. If you are going to do it, you have to have agreements struck with the municipality. The lack of clarity is it the municipality wherein the property lies, or is it the full board? There's not clarity with respect to who the agreements are, who we have to strike the agreements with, what these agreements have to look at. They're not saying you can't do it. They're saying if you are doing it, it's non-mandatory. You have to have board approval, and you have to negotiate it outside of the levy format, which means essentially you have to go with your hat in your hand to each municipality to say, do you still want to contribute? Do you still want this to be done? But you only do that after this board says, yes, we're still going to do this. And so those processes, what those agreements have to look like and whatever else, we're holding our breath and expecting to hear something from the province, what that construct looks like. Shelley and I and the rest of the management team just went through and said, okay, these, as it's identified today, are non-mandatory. These are mandatory. We need to get this moving in this position. So then if there's some adjusting back, we've got the room to do that. But we don't see that there's going to be any need to say, well, we also want to throw that in, because I think we've parsed it out adequately with how the province has defined it so far.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further, Councillor Carrick?
Thank you. Just in regards to the Clean Water Green Spaces Fund here, as I get to the bottom of page 69, general mandatory levy is projected to support 51% of mandatory services, with the balance funded through fees and chargebacks, recoveries, blah, blah, blah. The Clean Water and Green Spaces Fund is a non-mandatory levy, funds only 18% of them. So the 18% of that, so I understand that each municipality puts in, because when we started this, we'd asked for basically where's a third. So where does that put us going forward with provincial, federal? I know we don't quite know 100%, but as we move forward and we're using this fund to offset some items, and we're also buying land and stuff like that. So where does that put us with this fund?
Go ahead, Shelley.
So that sentence there was to highlight the fact that Clean Water Green Spaces, although primarily now it funds non-mandatory, it's only funding 18%. So those non-mandatory services are highly leveraged right now. But in saying that, that also means that the $1 million that we've gotten in levies is fully exposed now going forward. So while you can look at it and say, oh, it's only 18%, well, that 18% is actually a lot of money. So the authority has been very successful in getting a lot of money for these, what are now defined as non-mandatory services.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that we're still down the road optional for hopefully matching funds as when we first started. That's all. Just want to make sure it's clear that we're not just taking all that money and dispersing it. There's a rules for it, and also that it's still there, and we'll fight for it till the end if we have to.
Well, I guess let me just add further clarity. That Clean Water Green Spaces would no longer be considered levy. It's associated with non-mandatory services. So if it comes to us in the form of levy, we need to have these agreements with our municipal partners, but we can no longer just say, here, Windsor, here's your bill. No, it's not going to work like that anymore for the non-mandatory side of it.
Okay, no, thanks. That's the clarification I was looking for. So thank you very much.
Very good. Anything further? Councillor Sleeman? I'm sorry, there you go. Welcome. Hiya.
Like my question, when a grant become available from the provincial or even the federal government, is there any condition in the grant that has to be a percentage of mandatory or non-mandatory, or it's up to the board to divide it the way we think is fit?
Through you, Madam Chair.
You can help me, yeah.
Through you, Madam Chair. Grants that we would apply for the non-mandatory services, like tree planting on private lands or things of that nature, that is the question mark that we have, that we require the clarification on what agreements moving forward to even apply for that grant, because still applying for a grant, you have staff that are here, and for the staff to undertake that work and applying for the grant and what have you, we need the permission and we need the direction of this board. And we need the clarification provided from the province. What about those grant opportunities to do those mandatory projects that actually cost very little, if any, levy? But there always is a touch on levy, because staff are here. You have to have a forester here. You have to have a biologist here. So there is always a connection to levy, and other services, such as our involvement and action looking through climate change and looking through other undertakings that this board has approved our actions with. Many of those things are still tied into levy. We just have to very clearly define it's not going to be business as usual, and we have to have structure provided us and instruction provided us by the province to pursue those grant opportunities.
Okay. Tim, thank
Shelley,
you
did
so
you want
much.
to add to that? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, yes, please, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Shelley.
So Councillor Sleeman, all grants that come to us are restricted purpose grants. So no one ever gives us money and just say, no one ever says, here's some money, do as you please with it. That's not how grants are executed. We actually only get 2 grants for mandatory services. So the main one is our Section 39 grant for the flood operations for Section 39. That's $104,000. That appears in your report. The other grant we get for mandatory services is roughly, year to year, 95 to 120,000, and that's for drinking water source protection. So as I mentioned, the other grants that we apply for, we always state our purpose of what we're intending to use. And by default, that restricts the grant for that purpose. So we can't take $200,000 for tree planting and take 50 of it and use it to deliver permitting service. So that's not how it works. So no, and according to the Charities Accounting Act, Canada, the Income Tax Act, these restricted grants have to be used for the purpose for which they are intended. So there's not ever very much flexibility, if any.
Shelley, thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Janice?
Thank you. Just to go back to Member Carrick's comments, and I guess just to clarify this, I think if we go back to our municipalities and everybody wants to cut, I think some history should be known, I guess, especially with the green spaces and funding, clean water, green spaces. That's been able to me, Mr. Bernie may want to add on to this later, is we've been able to leverage to buy, whether a farmer up or property, or I go back years ago when property next to St. Clair College and the city came available, and not only through the clean water, green spaces, I think we are also leverage money from Trees Canada or different agencies that do help us out buying property and that. So if we were to go back to our municipalities, get rid of that get rid of that 18% or whatever, overall, it's going to hurt us in the long run, I think, because if some opportunities come available over the next couple of years, there won't be any money. We won't have budgeted knowing that something was going to come down the road. And, we got the different projects. We hear about them every day that different municipalities or something's coming forward. It's nice to still green up our area. And if we can't levy that now, knowing what's coming down the road, we have no funds. That's the way I see it. So I'd be careful just to want to cut different funding because it's easy to do. Let's look at the long term because it could benefit any one of our municipalities. And like you mentioned, you had Windsor years ago with St. Clair College. I forget the bush lot. Mr. Bernie may recall that. We bought stuff out in LaSalle, Amherstburg, Kingsville. You know, when it comes available, it's our opportunity. And in a lot of cases, it's well-established bush lots and it's property ready to go. So I guess just with some experience, let's not be eager to start cutting just because we can cut it. It's 18% and that kind of thing. So I don't, Mr. Bernie, you want to comment because I know you've been around for a few years too, and you could probably relate to some of those bush lots I'm talking about and how we got funding. We would have never got had we not had matching funds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Len's done a pretty good job of describing it. All I would add is, again, we continually were running into issues of not being able to have any kind of a war chest, as Len said, to allow us to have a matching fund to reach out to get federal or other provincial monies. And that's what CWGS allowed us to do. And it was the match that we created to get money to acquire some of these properties that many municipalities wanted us to acquire. Once acquired, management now of those properties would fall under a suite of leviable activities for land management. But acquiring some of those properties initially falls out of something that's outside of levy, and CWGS would allow us that leverage or that war chest to apply for grants.
Okay, very good. Anything from anybody else? Okay, then I'm going to read the recommendation and ask for a mover and a supporter that the 2021 draft budget and levy options be received for members' review and approval. And further, that the Board of Directors support option number 2 from the 3 levy funding options presented and outlined herein, and is as recommended by administration and supported by the Finance and Audit Advisory Board. And further, that administration circulate report 0321 with the companion 2021 budget summary document based on the option number 2 of the 2% to member municipalities for review, and further that administration provide notice under the Conservation Authorities Act of a weighted vote in accordance with Ontario Regulation 139.96 regarding the 2021 draft budget and the Board of Directors meeting on April 18th, 2021. And further that the 2019 accumulated unrestricted surplus of $118,000 be directed to the partial replenishment of the Revenue Stabilization Reserve. Deputy Mayor Bailey? And seconded by Marilyn Morrison. Any opposed? Well, that is carried. Okay, we have reports for information, BD 0420, that the review of regulations and planning applications as presented in report BD 0420 be received for members' information. Moved by Len Janice, seconded by Ed Sleeman. Well, thank you. It's going that well. Fantastic. Report B, environmental registry reports. Well, none, but we do have 1, 2, and 3. And there is a motion before you is that the board receive the ERO reports for information. That Conservation Ontario comments to the Environmental Registry of Ontario regarding the proposed implementation of provisions in the Planning Act that provide the minister enhanced authority to address certain matters as part of zoning order, ERO 019-2811, the Drainage Act regulatory proposal, and the proposed implementation of updates to Ontario Water Quality Management Framework be received for information. Trevor Jones, and seconded by Councillor Carrick. Very good. Anybody oppose? Alrighty. We have correspondence 1 through 5. Do we have any questions or comments on those? Any one of them? Seeing none, that we received the correspondence 1 through 5 for members' information. Moved by Counselor Lucier, seconded by Sue DeJarle. Any opposition? Seeing none. We now will be going into the committee of the whole for confidential matters related to property matters. That the meeting move from Board of Directors Committee of the whole related to property matters. Moved by Counselor Jones and Deputy Mayor Joe Burketti.
Just give us a moment, Madam Chair.
Certainly, yeah. As we move into in-camera session due to personnel matters, we would ask all individuals other than board members and senior administration to now leave the meeting. And in addition, I will wait to review that the live feed is off.